was nothing unusual about the face which stared back at him from the washroom mirror. It was the same image which Philip Horseman was used to seeing whenever he looked in a mirror. What unsettled him was the fact that his reflection was grinning, when he didn't feel the least bit amused. He knew he was still suffering from the previous night's excesses, yet this went way beyond the normal effects of a hangover. He didn't usually go out drinking on a Wednesday, but it was Amy's birthday. A Thai meal had been preceded by 3 pints of real ale in the Admiral's Rest, washed down with a few lagers in the restaurant, and followed by mojitos and margaritas in the Cubana bar. He had thought that a pint at lunchtime would help, hair of the dog and all that. It didn't. It only served to add weight to the hammer behind his eyes. His mind had contrived to wrap a towel around the implement, but it merely reduced the noise, not the impact. And now he was hallucinating, seeing something in the mirror which couldn't be real. He screwed up his eyes and twisted his mouth into a grimace. His reflection's grin grew wider. Phil wasn't easily frightened, but a sudden fluttering in his stomach made him realize he was scared now. The face looked exactly like his own, but it wasn't behaving in the same way, so it couldn't be his. Who did it belong to, then? How was it possible for someone to resemble him so closely? And how could he be in the mirror? Or were they observing each other from opposite sides of a window? When the Marx Brothers pulled a similar stunt, it was hilarious. But this wasn't remotely funny. Then he noticed that the image in the mirror was wearing a black leather jacket zipped up to the neck, whereas his own was unbuttoned. Was he completely out of his mind? Or was it some sort of a crazy dream? Couldn't really be happening, could it? Surely it wasn't an acid flashback. He'd only taken the stuff once, and that was 10 or 12 years ago. An exploratory expedition into the darkest regions of his psyche. Definitely a one-off experience. One hell of a mistake. The vision of his mother turned inside out while she berated him about coffee stains still gave him chills. He hadn't indulged in drugs or coffee since. Leaning over the basin, he turned on the cold tap and cupped his hands beneath the flow. He closed his eyes while he splashed his face, clutching a flimsy hope that he might return to normality when he opened them again. But he was in for a greater shock, which was electrifying in part. A surge of energy akin to an electrical current passed through his body as a pair of hands the size of his own grabbed him by the lapels of his jacket and yanked him off his feet. His eyes flashed open only inches from the surface of the mirror. He attempted to bring up his arms to shield his face from the glass when it shattered. To his amazement, there was no impact. Not until he landed on his head and slid across the ceramic tiled floor to collide with the far wall. His skull was filled with an army of clanging hammers now. No attempts at cover, just a cacophony of naked metal. Gerald Scarf's red and black cartoon squad from the wall marched across his field of vision. The picture only remained for a moment, but after it was gone he could still feel the tremors. The word aftershock jumped into his mind, but maybe that only applied to earthquakes. Resting on his elbows, he rubbed his face and forehead with both hands. When he lowered them, he saw that the right one was covered with blood. He raised it again, fingers feeling gently for the source of the red stream. It felt like quite a nasty gash. He ought to take a look at it in the mirror. Bang! A large brick crashed through the pain barrier. Sense and memory dodged the square-bashing hammers and forced their way back home. The mirror. Did he dare face it again? What would it show him next? He picked himself up from the cold floor, slowly. Rising onto his knees, he rested for a few seconds before straightening up to his full 5 feet 11 inches. With gel making his hair stand to attention, he was able to stretch to 6 feet. But otherwise he fell slightly short. He admitted it was silly and shallow, yet it had always been a source of disappointment to him since he stopped growing. But reality rarely matched people's hopes or expectations. Reality. He was facing the wall. He felt stupid, but he was reluctant to turn around for fear of what he might see. If he was that scared, he could simply open the door on his left and walk out into the corridor without looking back. But Phil wasn't that sort of person. He had been blessed or cursed with an inquiring mind. A mind which needed to know what the fuck was going on and find a rational explanation for the strange occurrence. In sharp contrast to his earlier sluggishness, he turned around quickly, as if he might catch out the man in the mirror. He twisted so fast that he cricked his neck. He could have saved himself the extra pain. The face he saw reflected winced at the very same instant that he did. The body wore an identical jacket to his, and there was blood trailing from a gash in the right temple. It was his own, somewhat shop-soiled self. Nevertheless, he couldn't resist poking out his tongue and scowling at the mirrored response. He let out a long breath, unsure if he felt relieved or disappointed. Pulling out a paper towel from the dispenser on the wall, he gingerly approached the basin, though he stood as far away as he could to reach for the tap. With one eye on the mirror, he wet one end of the towel and swiftly stepped backwards. While he cleaned his face, he puzzled over what he thought had happened to him. Already he was beginning to wonder whether his mind had started playing tricks before or after he banged his head. He couldn't understand the root cause of his injury, but he was damned sure he didn't want a repeat performance. Dabbing gently around the edges of the gash with the damp part of the towel, he tipped his head back to slow the release of blood. He couldn't hold the position long enough for it to have any noticeable effect. His neck ached too much. It was doubtful that tea and sympathy would be offered when he went back into the office looking like this. The guys were more likely to take the piss. He couldn't complain, as he would probably do the same if it were one of them.